sorry. Yep, 8.4 is the report on the Transport Asset Management Plan, and there's a Green Group amendment, and Sean Gilchrist speaking to this.
Good afternoon again. So this report gives an update on the Transport Asset Management Plan. Edinburgh has a Transport Asset Management Plan where most local authorities have a Roads Asset Management Plan. Edinburgh's plan takes into account both the cycling network and the park and ride sites into the Roads Asset Management Plan. The plan basically sets out our asset database and characteristics, the funding that we have available, our service standards, and sets these out and gives condition predictions for the future of the network. In addition to this Transport Asset Management Plan, we will continue to present annual reports to this committee, namely our options report, which we presented last October, setting out options for the next financial year, and our capital programme of works, which is normally presented prior to the start of the financial year. So, happy to take any questions.
Councillor Bandel, then Councillor Lang, then Councillor Munro.
I have a question which I've already sent to you, but I want to ask it publicly again. The plan assumes that traffic will increase, and that kind of concerns me because that's contrary to what we say in the City Mobility Plan, where we set out traffic reduction targets. So I was wondering how these objectives are accounted for in this plan.
Yeah, so the traffic figures that we have at the moment are live figures and what the traffic is at the moment within Edinburgh. And our forecast predictions are based mostly on current condition, how we've invested in the past, and what we expect the deterioration across the network to be. So we do work with Daisy's team on the mobility plan, and we build in, and this report supports that city mobility plan. And we review our forecasts every year and present those forecasts along with our capital programme every year, so that will continually be updated. So if we start to see reduction in traffic, we should start to see a reduction in deterioration. But it's a very, very hard one to quantify, because when the network changes, for example, if you're narrowing carriageways, a lot of traffic will be pushed into narrower spaces, so therefore deterioration on those spaces might start to deteriorate. However, to offset that, there will be less carriageway, therefore deterioration over that whole asset will be a lot slower than it is at the moment. So it's a really difficult one to answer for the future, but as I say, we analyse it on an annual basis and present updated forecasts every year.
Can I add one other thing to that, which I think Sean's missed, is when we're actually looking at the deterioration of roads, it's not private cars. Private cars do not affect roads. It's the heavy vehicles and the buses. So therefore, if you've got a 30% reduction in private car, it's not going to make much difference to the deterioration of the roads. If you get 30% reduction in the heavy vehicles, it makes a massive difference.
So can I ask, so Cliff, the heavy vehicles, is that not more about the underlying structure of the road, whereas the heavy traffic levels will affect the wearing course, won't it?
It's not just that, it's basically heavy vehicles. It will actually create your potholes, basically. Your private cars will not create a pothole, really. Potholes are created by basically defects in the road surface, which basically gets water into it and then gets freeze-thaw, but it's that continual loading of it and unloading, mainly caused by heavy vehicles, or SGVs rather than the private cars. It was the old design 30 years ago. We did million standard axles, and we used to convert the things in. That's not how we do it now. It's basically, we still do convert it into million standard axles, but that's multiplying up the SGV axles, basically.
Mr. Barwell.
Just to add to Cliff's point, I think what we've got to bear in mind, this is the asset management plan, so this is generally driven by compliance, safety, asset condition. The mobility plan, I think I could see a few raised eyebrows around certain members, but we have to bear in mind that obviously different classes of vehicles contribute to different issues this committee deals with. So whilst, as Cliff says, undoubtedly private vehicles don't carry the loading on the network, they do contribute to casualties on the network, they do contribute to air quality on the network, they contribute to congestion. And I think the difficulty in linking, for example, the aim of the mobility plan, as you say, Councillor, is to reduce car kilometres, is from an asset management point of view, we have to deal with what we certainly know right now, because we we have to keep that network compliant. As this committee, over time, will consider both those key bits of data, the road condition index and the car kilometre mileage, I think it's a reasonable point to assume that at a point in time we should be looking at cause and effect and saying, has the network condition changed because we are achieving our aim of reducing car kilometres? But right now, I guess regrettably, but sensibly, we can only deal with what we know right now.
Okay, so if I can go back to Sean, so Councillor Bandel is making a good point, but just now the road condition generally in the city isn't what we want it to be, and let's all agree on that. So if we were to recast what's in the report in terms of the modelling going forward, I guess what we're saying is there'd be very little difference in the near term, but perhaps over that 20-year period, I think it is on the graph, we would start to see some change towards the latter part of that. Is that fair?
That's a fair comment. In fact, that's why we do reassess the condition of the network every year, and we're as Sean says, we're re-evaluating all the time, every year, basically.
Right, I'm going to go back to Councillor Bandel, if she's wanting to follow up on that question. Yeah.
I guess what I am confused about is because it does mention that, you need to look at the next 20 years as well. So that, for me, I'm not sure how that fits with we need to look at what's happening right now, and that's what we're basing the plan on, especially if it's for the next 5 years, and that brings us up to 2029. That's nearly 2030. When we want to meet all our different climate targets as well. And I guess looking at those tables, I'm thinking, okay, but, obviously we have problems with the report, the plan mentions it, extreme weather events, flooding and stuff like that as well, which has an impact on the network. And, if we look at our climate plans, we say we need to, invest in adapting our built environment as well. So I'm thinking, looking at this plan and thinking, okay, but that doesn't mention that at all. It mentions that traffic will increase. That means maintenance needs to increase. And it doesn't really make reference to we need to somehow do something about the climate as well. We need to, that's where I'm not really, that's where I'm concerned.
Is there a question there somewhere, Councillor Bandel?
Yeah. Basically, I'm wondering how the tables, my assumption is that the tables would change if you, assume that traffic will reduce as well, or if you assume that, for example, flooding and extreme weather winds pose a big problem to our road network. Is that right? Because that's how that's how I make sense of it.
So I think, I think this is interesting because Sean can't kick me under the table, but this is a relatively dry report, an asset management plan. It's a required piece of work, but I think the point you're making, Councillor, is a very valid one in terms of what our investment strategy is. So the asset management plan is based on data and condition of asset, and it's important for things like bridge integrity and test failed lamp columns and road conditions and keeping people safe. But as we touched on earlier on around adaptation, active travel investment, there are lots of ways that this committee will choose to invest money. And I think the point that you're making is particularly pertinent to how does this committee down the line decide which is the best way to invest in money. We've had a debate earlier on road safety. We have traditionally been very siloed in having bits of money for road safety and active travel and carriageway surfacing and a bit in parks for trees. And I think the question we need to ask ourselves moving forward is how do we move to a more single pot of investment that this committee can decide, okay, these are all the strategic aims we have. What's the best way to spend that money to meet the aims of the city mobility plan, the adaptation plan, the road safety plan? And to be honest, the way local government finances are going, I would speculate my professional recommendation is sooner rather than later doing that is a good thing, because we often have competing priorities at this committee because we've had a portion of capital and it just never gets rebooted. It's just top sliced or slightly revised every year. We never actually reset it and say, is that the right investment strategy? But I think the point, I hope my interpretation of the point you're making is at some point in time we have to do something different because the allocation of funding has to mirror any changing strategy.
Can I add one addition to that? It will change over time because let's say, for example, we multiply the number of active travel segregated cycle lanes by 10. That gets built into the asset management plan. It's the maintenance of that that will be part of a future plan TAMP that comes forward. So it will, in itself, how we build new infrastructure, this is about maintaining the infrastructure as of today, for tomorrow, the next day. And as that infrastructure changes and the types of infrastructure change, so will the plan change.
Councillor Lang.
Thanks, Gareth. I've got a couple of questions. I have to say, Gareth, Cliff's face sank when you described it as a dry report. This is not a dry. Don't worry, Cliff. This is not a dry report. I've got a couple of questions. I mean, my first kind of follows on from this, because when it comes to asset management around condition and safety, I mean, is it not the case that if we didn't actively manage this in the way that it's set out, actually, in one sense, we may be exposed legally in claims when people do suffer damage and then wish to try and get compensation? Is that not right?
Is the correct answer. Yes, you're 100% right there.
Yeah, again, that's why we have a risk-based approach to safety inspections, which supports this plan. So we set it out in the dry report. I mean, I'm actually okay with that. I've heard it called a lot worse. So therefore, this report is obviously the starting point, and then we have the other strategies which build and support our targets within that report.
Okay. My other question is on something completely different. Street lighting. So, you know, against what's actually, again, good set of figures, the compliance on street lighting, I thought, wasn't great. Because particularly if you look at priority repairs within 24 hours and repairs within 5 days, it's a quarter to 30% where that's not happening. What's stopping that?
I've got to be careful what I say, because it's not done with our new CMS system, traffic signal, with the traffic lights. Not traffic lights, the traffic, the street lights. The lights tell us what the faults are. So it's not like in the old days we had to go and see the dark lantern. Is the lantern dark? Somebody, it's got mostly in dark nights in the winter time picked up. Now it's telling you most of the faults we're having are through power connections. So it's repairs by Scottish Power. And if you look at the ones that we need to fix, it's when we say it has to be done in 24 hours, that's when you have a group of lights, 5 or more in the one street, which becomes a safety issue. Most of these are caused not by the single lantern being out, because it's a power connection. And there's a backlog in the Scottish Power connections to fix them.
Councillor Munro, was there? No, so, right, okay. Councillor Munro, then Councillor Cowden.
Thank you very much for your report. I didn't find it dry at all. I thought it was very interesting. So, I mean, the elephant in the room, potholes on Edinburgh's roads, absolutely horrendous. Cyclists, drivers, you go around the city, it's like an obstacle course of potholes. And when I speak to my residents, they just say, well, we just want them fixed. Please, please, just fix them. And it's really difficult to cycle and drive around, even where I live and other places in the city, because of the potholes. That aside, if I can draw your attention to Appendix 1, Section 3 of the report, it's just something that caught my eye. It contains an interesting poll which suggests 42% of Edinburgh residents are satisfied with the standard of our road surfaces. The explanation for this, which I think is a surprisingly high figure, is because it's been taken from a 2018 poll that I found, and yet it's still included in the 2024 plan. And then you have another poll in 23, which has also been included in the 2024 plan, which asks residents numerous questions on neighbourhood satisfaction, yet not one reported question that I could find that related to road surfaces. So I'm just wondering, why is that? And was the question asked? And if so, what was the percentage response? As I think it would be lower than 42%.
Okay, yeah, so the last survey was the 2023, which was quite a general survey, and it was about council services, which is the one, the second part what you're talking about. The last one that was specific to roads, which asked road-specific questions, was 2018. There hasn't been one carried out since.
Yeah, that's what I found out. So you've
that's
got a
exactly right.
poll in 2018 included in the 2024
Yes.
plan.
Yeah, there has been no, as I said, there's been no specific roads-related survey carried out in Edinburgh. We're going to be working with other local authorities and APSI they're creating a more specific survey to be carried out on roads Scottish-wide.
Yeah, but on reading that report, it suggests that 42% of Edinburgh residents are satisfied, but you're saying that goes to a 2018 poll.
Yes.
So in the report, if anybody else is reading that, they would go, well, unless I'd went and found that 2018 report, which I did, anybody reading that would go, oh, Edinburgh residents are really happy with the state of their roads, it's 42%, where I think if you were to do it now, I would think that was going to be much lower. I think it's just slightly confusing when you're reading that report. Are you going to be asking that question?
Sorry, Councillor Monroe, it does say very clearly in the report that it was from 2018,
Yes,
very clearly. So it's not that people shouldn't be confused. You can argue it shouldn't be there, but
Of course it should.
yeah.
But if you're reading it, it suggests that 42% of Edinburgh residents are satisfied, but that is not factually correct for 2023-24. That's for 2018, which was a long time ago, convener.
Sorry, I can maybe, I wouldn't disagree with the councillor. I think hindsight being a wonderful, we probably shouldn't have included it. This was the Edinburgh People Survey, which the council doesn't do anymore. That decision was taken a few years back because of financial saving that we don't do the Edinburgh People Survey. So actually there isn't right now a planned kind of rerun of that survey. So actually, I think it's one of those things we should probably revise moving forward, unless committee wishes to do a survey. But I'm mindful of the fact that we stopped the original survey to save funding, so I'm not entirely sure I could recommend where that funding would come from. But I wouldn't disagree on record that the likelihood in road condition, my professional guess would be it would probably be similar if you track our RCI, our road condition index versus that time. Actually, it has seen a couple of positive upturns, but it certainly won't have improved, I can tell you that much.
Oh, it's not improved. Thank you.
Councillor Cowdy.
Thank you very much, convener, and you will be delighted to hear, Mr. Barwell, that I found this very dry. I'm on with you. Not as dry as the revenue monitoring report, but joking aside, good question which I keep raising, and I haven't got an answer to it, but I throw it in here, kind of spitballing to try and see if I can get some sort of inspiration. Cycleways, cycle network. Are they included in the? Do they include the existing non-segregated cycle lanes, so the painted cycle lanes on the roads? They are, okay. I am worried that those cycle lanes are just deteriorating, and at the same time we're looking at spending vastly more money on segregated cycle lanes where we don't appear to be even able to maintain our existing painted cycle lanes. So I keep reflecting on, is there a way we can, well, at least help improve the maintenance of our existing cycle structure? So my question is there a way to improve the maintenance of our existing cycling infrastructure that I'm speaking about now? Maybe a lead in, under cycling infrastructure, I think it said that roads get a 5% weighting added to them if they're on a family cycle route or have a cycle lane on them. That 5% is, we're talking about the sort of road I've described, which has got a painted priority cycling lane. So if that was increased to a 10% weighting, would that help improve the general road painted cycle lanes throughout the city?
If you put a 10%, it would bring streets that have a segregated cycle lane on them further up the programme. However, the danger to that is that you start bringing up streets that are not on as bad a condition because of such a high weighting. We had it with buses several years ago where we had too high a rating for high-use buses, and medium-use buses. It meant that they were coming straight up to the top of the programme, regardless of condition. So it's about getting it right, and 5% does make quite a difference where you've got condition scores that are quite similar. It does actually make,
Yep, thanks for that. That's perfect. So just to clarify, basically a reasonable road would get put up even if the cycle, I mean, just because the cycle lane might not be in good nick, or even if the cycle lane was in good nick, it would still get prioritised, which might be not a great use of resources. Yep, that's fine. Thank you. Okay, well, just, sorry, and there's a thought, I'll ask the same question next time, and we'll keep asking that question until I get a good
The other
answer.
thing you've got to be wary of, what we keep saying, is I know you might have a road with a cycle lane marked on it. The cyclists will still cycle on the carriageways as well, so you've got to make sure, and they are the most vulnerable road users of the cyclists, so that's who you're trying to get your condition for the cyclist, basically. That's what you're trying to achieve across the whole road network.
Apologies, Councillor Aston. Did you have a question, or did you withdraw it? I can't remember.
I changed my mind.
Okay.
I think we're all getting a bit restive now, to be honest.
There's a strong hint from Councillor Aston there. Councillor McFarlane.
Thanks, Convener. It's just to ask on the lamp replacement to LED and carbon savings. So have we completed the rollout of that at 100%, or are we now at a stage of just as and when they're needing done?
So we've pretty much, well, in fact, largely all the lanterns that could be replaced have been replaced. The lanterns have been replaced. That's reported through the emissions reduction plan, which goes to Policy and Sustainability Committee. So, yeah, they're happy to circulate that paper. But I think it's fair to say it's made a very substantial contribution to the Council's emissions reduction to date.
Do we have any other further questions on this report? Okay, so I'm happy to thank the officers present for this report. Some would call it dry, but it's very useful, I think. And obviously there's different scenarios there for future funding. It's quite concerning actually to see what some of them could mean. But I'll pass over to Councillor Fachenda now, second.
Second that formally.
And I think I'm going to Councillor Bandel now.
That's me. The reason we are bringing this amendment is that transport asset management plays a central role in achieving our climate targets, and we don't see much consideration of that in this report, and that concerns us very much. I understand from our conversations with officers that this plan is usually reviewed every 5 years, which takes us up to 2029. That's only 1 year away from our council's 2030 net zero target, and the target set out in the city mobility plan as well. And so I think it's really important that this asset management plan supports these targets. As we point out in our amendment, the figures contained in this plan seem to be based on the assumption that traffic will increase in the coming years, which conflicts with our traffic reduction targets in the city mobility plan. And I don't want to approve a 5-year plan on how we are going to invest in our transport assets that assumes that we are going to fail to meet these targets we set out to achieve. We also had a business bulletin item on the climate-ready Edinburgh plan today, which makes reference to the disruption to our transport systems caused by flooding and other extreme weather events. And as I was told earlier when I asked a question about how that plan affects work within the remit of this committee, transport asset management will be one of the ways by which we make Edinburgh climate-ready. The Transport Asset Management Plan notes that many of the council's roads were not designed to accommodate this level of traffic, and warns that more extreme weather events caused by climate change have the potential to cause more rapid deterioration. And I absolutely agree with that, and that is very concerning, but I don't think the conclusion of the report that this creates a growing need for maintenance is quite right. In our view, what these facts tell us is that our Transport Asset Management Plan should support investment in traffic reduction and climate adaptation measures, for example, by prioritizing dropped curbs or flood prevention, which are covered by this plan. I recognize that we also get annual programs of investments to this committee, but I think it's important that we consider climate in these high-level plans as well. As a councillor, I think a big problem I have with this plan is that I can't replicate the maths that's gone in to produce the tables to see, how much funding there is available for all the different assets. I can only check the narrative that the math seems to be based on, and I don't see much consideration of climate or traffic reduction in there. and that's why I am bringing forward this amendment. I think it's very frustrating that this report was not available at the APM stage, because I think these are questions I would have asked at the APM stage, and we could have avoided this. We could have ironed that out prior to committee if we had that opportunity for extra scrutiny. But yeah, looking at it, I think we need more assurance that our investment strategies align with our climate targets, and therefore we don't feel comfortable signing off on this plan as it stands, and are asking for it to be updated and brought back in March. Thank you.
Formally, convener.
Okay, so, Councillor Ashton, sorry, I was about to go straight to someone else.
Yeah, no, that's fine, convener. I just want to be very brief and say a few quick words in enthusiastic support of the Green Addendum here. You know, just to pick up on a couple of other things that in the question and answer maybe weren't fully covered. Councillor Bandle's absolutely right to talk about the impact of the worsening climate crisis on the condition of roads, not just through flooding, but actually increasingly wet winters. And, you know, you just have to look at the state of the roads in January compared to what they're like in November from wet, freezing, breaking up, etc. And also just picking up on something that Cliff said in relation to Councillor Bandle's point about you know, the impact of us pursuing a reduction in the number of kilometres driven by cars is, you know, one way, of course, is expanding our segregated cycle network, getting more people out of vehicles into active travel, which doesn't have anything like the same impact on road surface condition, obviously. Interesting point that Cliff makes, of course, about heavy vehicles, and of course buses are very heavy vehicles. It could be that maybe we need more transit methods that don't pound the asphalt and instead travel on rail, for instance, maybe tram, maybe even the South Sub. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Get a monorail to Morningside one day, perhaps, Councillor Munro.
One of those days you're going to give me a heart attack. A monorail to Morningside? I don't think so. I do not think so.
Councillor Lang.
Thanks. I mean, if it was a dry report, it's fairly created an interesting debate. This, to my mind, is a report of fact which officers have presented. It's then for us to decide what decisions we take going forward on the basis of this. What gets me convener is I actually have respect for the Green position on this, because to be fair, you know, as long as I've been a councillor, they've always voted against money for fixing roads. And I recognise they don't agree with spending that money, and that's fair enough. I find the position of the SNP on this consistently curious, though, because they said that they fully support the amendment that's put there, and yet I always hear SNP individual councillors complaining about how roads in their own wards are not being resurfaced and they're not being repaired, and yet year after year they vote against the money that our officers tell us that they need, not necessarily to improve the network, just to stop it getting even worse. And one of the benefits of I think we get much better information than we used to as a member of this committee from Cliff and Sean and from other officers, is setting out in hard facts and pounds and pence what it is we need to put in, not just if we're looking to improve it, but just if we are trying to stop the situation getting worse. And I agree with Councillor Munro. Gosh, if there's one thing week in, week out that my constituents tell me, is that they want this council to sort out the roads and the pavements and footways and paths. And it's been always a big priority for me and my group and it will continue to be as well, not least for the reason that Cliff said, and it's in the report, we're talking about carriageway and the on-road cycle network as well. So we're talking about surfaces that cyclists use too, and in my experience, the people who are most often at risk with poor road conditions are actually cyclists, and they're the ones that suffer, are at the risk of greatest injury. So I think the report that we've got before us today is a perfectly reasonable, fair, accurate statement of fact, and we should support it unamended.
Thank you for that, Councillor Lang. Do we have any other contributions? Okay, I shall sum up then. I think road condition, road condition in the city isn't acceptable. Road and footpath condition isn't acceptable, and that's no fault of council officers. And so I do spend some time going to community councils, etc., to talk about tram and to talk about bus priority and all these other things that we want to do. All the things we'll be talking about in February, actually, taking non-essential traffic out of the city centre. But in order to get the right to be heard at these meetings, they want to see that we're getting the basics right seriously. And part of that is about, at least maintaining the quite poor often state of the roads in the city, but hopefully improving them. And in theory, improving them should be easy because they are, things can only get better. So I think someone said. So yeah, but I think the questions that Councillor Bandel raised were perfectly legitimate, in terms of, well, are we modelling future growth or decline in traffic in the city? And even other things like, well, what does the impact of heavier EVs with greater torque, etc., have on road condition? But the biggest thing having an impacting on road condition today, unfortunately, isn't climate or the traffic levels. It's the basic condition of the road that we have and we have to deal with. And I think officers were perfectly clear that if we did remodel to take into account hopefully the reduction in traffic by 30% up to 2030, actually the impact on modelling road condition over the next 20 years would be quite limited in those early years, and it's in the longer term we seek to get benefits. So so I think really the focus is to understand where the network is, and we have that in this report, and also understand what funding is needed to at least maintain the current standard. And I absolutely echo what Councillor Lang says. I think since 22, when this committee reformed, that one of the first things we asked for was an understanding of what was needed to improve the state of our roads. And we now know as a committee, so when we go into the budget debate next month, although it won't be easy, we do know what is needed to maintain roads at the current standard and what is needed if we go beyond that. So if parties that choose to go below that, whether through necessity in terms of the cuts we face or through choice because of politics, do so knowingly, and I think that's important to recognise. So with that out of the way, as looking at the clock, what I'll say is I'm perfectly happy to accept the Green Amendment, but stop at where we say that a revised report is brought to the March meeting of the Transport and Environment Committee, and instead we'll say a future TAMP report, or the next TAMP report. So rather than bring, let's change that and bring it as part of the next TAMP report. So that accepts the very valid points you've made, Councillor Bandel, but also that really, if we were to ask officers to spend a lot of time over the next few weeks looking at this, it's probably going to tell us exactly the same thing for the next 5 years.
Can I check then, when would that be, the next update?
I'm not exactly sure, actually. But we'll ask officers when the next TAMP report will be. When would the next TAMP report be, Sean?
Normally within 5 years.
Within 5 years.
I don't think that's good enough.
Sounds like I might go to a vote.
Okay, so the motion then will be, sorry, better stop my timer. the motion is the report, which is moved by Councillor Arthur, seconded by Councillor Facenda. And can I just double check, Councillor Arthur, if you still want to accept those parts of the Green Group amendment? Yep, okay. So that will be all of the Green Group amendment up to the part in point 1.3, which says strategies based on them, and then change the rest of that sentence to say in the next TAMP report. And then the amendment will be the Green Group amendment as circulated by Councillor Banzel. So could I have votes for the motion first, please, by Councillor Arthur? 9, thank you. And for the amendment by Councillor Banzel, please. 2, thank you.